So, all right. So let's talk about you, though. 4 decades of music, everything you've done and accomplished, all the roads and paths you've taken. So, I kind of want to start at the beginning of your
Okay,
life and then proceed through all of it, including last week you released your latest album. So, we'll talk about
right,
that as well.
great, great.
But just kind of start at the beginning, your life and where you grew up, where you went to school, that sort of thing.
Oh my God. Well, I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to a boarding school for a couple of years in Massachusetts. The last 2 years of high school, actually got kicked out, but then I moved to Vermont. I didn't go to college. I was like a hippie carpenter. I've always played music from when I was 5, 6 years old. My great aunt was a music teacher, cello, piano, and then as the Beatles showed up and everything changed. So it got very uncool to carry a cello to junior high school. So shifting to guitar, and that changed it for obviously for millions of us. Um, in Vermont, moved to San Francisco, drove across country when I was 20 with my pickup truck and my toolbox and my guitar. And in San Francisco, you're getting the quick version.
Okay.
Um, I started I started writing songs and playing the guitar, in my studio apartment because I didn't have any money. And I always I always figured that writing somewhere I figured out that writing was important. So I started writing immediately, and then I would go to jam sessions where I started meeting people, and I would play my songs. And at one of these jam sessions on Market Street, I don't remember the name of the club in San Francisco, a guy came up to me afterwards and threw himself on me. I was kind of like, what is this guy? And he wanted me to play in his band, and his name was Tommy Heath, and that was essentially the beginning of what became Tommy Tutone. Tommy had been playing in bands for years. He was not a primary songwriter, but I think it's clear that he saw in my songs the value right away if he could start singing them, what could happen. And that was the first band I was ever in, really, rock and roll band. And we started playing gigs in Northern California and worked together and, made a record, which had a single on it, the first record. It's still my favorite record with Mickey Shine, who was in a band called Clover. And I saw you had, this all goes back to the Marin crowd because I saw you did Johnny Cola on one of these, right? Yeah. So Mickey was in a band called Clover where Huey was in it and John McPhee and all those guys. And he was our first drummer and a guy named Terry Nails. And then second record had 867 on it, which I wrote with a guy named Alex Cole, who was in Clover. And then that was a big hit, and we had a lot of fun, and we, rode the 15 minutes, and then we rode the other 15 minutes, both directions. So that's that chapter, very briefly. Should I keep going?
Well, I just kind of want to focus on some of that, like the early days. Not that's most interesting. I think your whole life is interesting, but yeah, those early days. So I saw a clip. It was you and American Bandstand. And you were talking about that with Dick Clark about how you were a carpenter before you became, before you got into music.
Yeah.
So, like, what made you pick up the guitar transition? Were you even playing any sort of music at that point, or?
Well, I was always playing.
Oh, you
I
were
was
playing. Okay.
always, in high school, I was with an acoustic duo. When I was in Vermont, I was playing around either on my own or sitting in with people. So there was always something going on. I just never did it full time until I got to San Francisco and then made that transition. But even, when Tommy and I were putting the band together and trying to get a record deal, I was paying the rent by swinging a hammer. So that's how, because we weren't really making enough playing gigs, bar gigs, to really live on. I mean, we could, but I was doing both at that point until we got a record deal.
And when you were younger, did you always was that always your goal? Like, oh, I'm going to be a musician someday, or was it some sort of, it'll always be fun, like side thing to do, playing.
A romantic story about having some epiphany when I was 12, but when I go back and I look at the what was the internet for me growing up, which was essentially the Sears catalog,
Mm-hmm.
and in the Sears catalog, it had everything that I could imagine wanting because it had all the sports equipment, everything that you could, ever want. And it had also all the music gear. So in one place, you could stare at the Silvertone amps and guitars and drums, and also flip over to, baseball mitts and everything. So it's not like things have changed. It's so funny because my Instagram feed is still sports clips and music clips. It's like, whoever it is, Larry Bird, things or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it goes right over to, some music clips. So nothing's really changed that much since, it was always there, both of them.
Right, right. And who were some of your early music influencers then growing up? Like, who did you look up to? Who did you like listening to back then?
It all started out with the Beatles, period. It's just like that was it. And to this day, I still can't play a Beatles song because they're too complicated, their changes. But, if I have to go back to like where my personal songwriting roots come from, and, I don't know how much control anybody has over what their roots are, because my limitations, and again, I think not again, but limitations are a gift in a way, because when you think of some of the great artists, in my mind, part of what makes people great that I really love is that they're kind of relatively limited into where their pocket is, and it makes it special. They can't do everything. They kind of have this little place for it. So for me, whatever my limitations were as a singer and a songwriter and a guitar player, I certainly gravitated listening to people like, all the great songwriters, Nick Lowe, the band. I was just telling somebody there, I played with a drummer named Steve Goulding, who was in Graham Parker and the Rumor. And, I love those, Little Feat, all those, kind of song oriented bands, and then all the singer-songwriters that are the obvious ones, whether it was not Springsteen initially, but there was a period where Springsteen was in there. But and a lot of the English guys still blow my mind. It's like, Ray Davies forever. And the Brits seem to have a certain take on, there's very little earnestness in the British songwriters. When you think about Springsteen, he kind of tells you how to feel, like, he tells you. And what I love about the British guys is they don't tell you how to feel with their songwriting. There's no over earnestness with what they're doing. So at any rate, it's, and then Doc Pomus and all that old school kind of up on the roof stuff. There's no question that all of that stuff is in my songwriting somewhere, somehow.
And as the co-founder of Tommy Tutone, and then the hit in the 80's, what, that song in particular, what was the inspiration behind it? And did you think at the time like it would be as successful as it was like when you were writing it, or was it just kind of like one of these, this is a fun song, some people may like it, but maybe nothing will ever come of it, or
well, I mean,
was there something unique about it?
At that point in my career, it's not like I had a bunch of hit records and I knew what, how to do that. I was writing a bunch with Alex Call, who's the co-writer on that song. And I don't have, my memory's terrible, but I know that, one day I went out to the studio that he and I were using to write at, and Alex was playing essentially that song. And I went, what the hell is that? And we finished it together. But as soon as I heard what he was doing, it was clear to me that this was fun. I mean, that's really all you're doing when you're writing is entertaining yourself. And then periodically you get lucky, and whatever you think is funny or good or entertaining, other people like as well. And in that case, I knew that I was entertained and loved whatever this thing was. And I remember when we finished writing it, I took it into the rehearsal room with the band and just started playing it. And instantly everybody was into it. Still at that point, it was just because it was fun to play. And it was always an indication because I was singing it at that point, and Tommy showed up at the rehearsal, and as soon as he heard it, he said, "Give me the lyric sheet." And I took it over, which was what he should have done. But it was clear from the beginning that it was just fun as hell. And I have to say, to this day, there is no such thing as a bad version of 867.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. It's like there's no such thing as a bad version of Louie Louie. It can't be bad. As bad as it is, that's genius. in a way. And 867 has that thing. And, if I knew how to do it, I would have done it 5 other times. But, I got really lucky. I got really lucky that I showed up that day with Alex and that he and I finished it. And I brought whatever I brought to the table with that. And then that brought it to the band, and Tommy put his mojo on it. And the track is kind of interesting. And a lot of people, it's so funny, people ask me about that. And I'm like, I don't remember. But, it's a really classic. It's the best of what Tommy and I did together, because in that one track, you can hear Tommy and I doing the different things that we both brought, the personality of our playing, because there's a lot of little different parts in it that are interesting in there. So again, it was just, it takes a village sometimes, and we all got lucky with that one.
And what was it like the first time you heard it on the radio? Were you like, wow,
well,
this thing is like out there now, I've never had that happen
well,
to me before.
That's always insane, because back in those days, again, there was no internet and no CDs. And so, that's how you got your music, was on the radio. So, and more to the point, when you're in your car and you got it on the radio, that is always mind blowing. To get it on in your house was really cool. But if you're in the car and heard that for the first time, that was insanity. That was the epiphany of those moments. Because again, in those days, that's, if you wanted to hear something, you had to go to someone's house to check out their album collection. Excuse me.
Yeah.
The hearing it on the radio was mind blowing.
And then, so I would imagine that you go out on tour, you have a hit song, you're playing it, then to hear like the crowd sing it, right, with you. I mean, it's always those hit songs that, the crowd is so passionate about, that like they'll sing almost as loud, if not louder than you. I've been to concerts where the crowd's singing so loud they drown out the artist. I would imagine like that kind of song was that for you. So what was that like when like people are singing like the lyrics that literally I wrote, and all across the country,
It was a shared experience. And I always say, it's like, I mean, I wrote the song with Alex, but I don't own that. The universe owns that song. And that was like part of what was apparent when that hit, is that people would come to the shows. And at that point, we had already booked a tour in small clubs. So even though the thing was a hit, we were playing small venues, and they were, packed like a sardine can. And, everyone was going bonkers over that song. And we used to do it twice, because it was like the audience wanted it so much, and we didn't care. It was just so much fun. We would play it twice. It was a shared experience with the audience. And that's part of what I love about, that communication that goes on between a band and an audience when things are really, sparking, that it really is a shared experience. I think it's why we love live music, is because we're all sharing that. And with artists that you love and they put on a great performance, you get that, it's going in both directions, and at that point it was, exploding in both directions.
I think you might be the first artist I've talked to or a concert I've been to where they've played it twice. I think everyone like demands it, oh, we love this song, but I've never heard anyone say that they play it twice, but that's great.
I wouldn't be surprised. We were a pretty naive bar band, so I doubt we were the first and only, but we definitely were doing it.
Where did the name for the band come from, Tommy Tutone? I was always curious about
his nickname. When I met Tommy Heath, he played under the name of Tommy Tutone, and when we started playing together, the band was Tutone Keller.
Okay, all right.
And when we signed to Columbia, the contracts with Tutone Keller, and then the label, which is a very traditional move. They focus on the lead singer. And so they wanted it to be Tommy Tutone, because for various reasons, and I think most of them are obvious marketing reasons.
Yeah.
Tutone Keller sounded like a law firm, and Tommy was the front guy. And so it allowed them a much more straightforward target in marketing. And at that point, it was the first band I was in, and I was not remotely comfortable with being the front guy. I was very happy being the guy behind, orchestrating what was happening. So I was very happy to defer in that case.
So you're saying something like Hall & Oates wouldn't sound like a law firm to you?
Well, let's be real. It's like if that was just Daryl Hall, John Oates wouldn't be very happy, but Daryl was the front.
That's true. Yeah.
You hear this story all the time, whether it's with artists where the bands get upset because so much focus is on the lead singer, or then they end up going solo, and whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. And do you enjoy talking about that song in that period of your life? I assume it's stuck with you your whole life and probably will. Or
Uh,
are you like, that was one part of my life, and yes, that was a fun time, but I have this whole huge other part of my life that I've lived.
well, yeah, that was 40 some odd years ago, and I don't make a living playing 867. Um, Fortunately, it's really a fun song. So regardless of where I go and who I'm playing with, the musicians love to play it, because they all have a different relationship with it, which, is really sweet. Um, just thank God I really like the song, and thank God it's really fun to play. And it is. Um, but it's not like I'm out there pounding, playing gigs every day with 867. And, Tommy's
Right.
out there hopefully making a living using the name Tommy Tutone, and God bless him. But, that isn't what I've been doing for 20, 30 years.
And do you and I guess so, all right, so the question is always like, who's Jenny? And I know you've been asked that a bunch of times. And I actually came
Right.
across you because your daughter's TikTok. She did a TikTok with you. Where she was asking about that because she's like, my mom's not Jenny, so who is she? And it was like this big mystery. And then so for some reason she showed up in my feed, but and then she had this like follow-up TikTok about how people were reaching out to her saying that they thought that their mom was Jenny. And I think she interviewed one of
And,
them.
well,
So, or will that
the,
always
the
remain a mystery? Because I feel like for some songs or some songwriters, you ask them and you're like, it's up to you to determine. Like it'll always be a mystery. Whatever it means to you is what makes me happy.
well, it doesn't matter what I say. People are going to have their own stories about it. So
Everyone's Jenny, right? Everyone.
I'll tell you one anecdote. I think the first round of PR press we were doing for the record, when that record came out and that was a hit, and there was a head of PR at Columbia, and we were being interviewed, and the woman or the person interviewing us said, so where does, who's Jenny, where'd they come from? And I told the truth. And when the interview was over, the person from Columbia, Shelley Sellover, pulled me aside and said, don't ever do that again. He said, you have to make up something better than that. So, we started making stuff up. And then, Tommy to this day will tell you he wrote the song, and Jenny was a real person. But whatever.
Okay. All right. Well, it's good,
We'll, yeah.
Let the mystery live on. That's what I say.
You can ask Alex, and he'll tell you his version too. So everybody has their own.
Everyone's got a version. Okay. And everyone's got a Jenny, right? um, and okay, so transitioning, after that part of your life,
Right.
you went on to do management, publishing, in different roles, and then you would work with Philip Glass. So what was that transition like into that side of the music industry? And was that something that you wanted to do? And did you find it, just as fulfilling and rewarding? Kind of talk about that.
Well, this is where, the story takes a dark turn because, after the band, crashed and burned, which we did, crash and burn. There was a long period where I was holding it together with gaffer's tape and used up chewing gum. And it went on for a long time where I really wasn't making much of a living. I tried doing stuff on my own. I had production deals with labels, blah, 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 played gigs around New York, had a band, and I wasn't making a living, and it was ugly. And, you probably don't get much of these stories because it's not as charming, but, that's a reality with anybody in this business is that, this pop music, because it's supposed to go pop and disappear. People always say, why do you guys break up? And I say, that's not the question. The question is, how come the Stones are still together? That's what the question is, because you're not supposed to last forever in pop music. And in our world, a lot of that stuff keeps going on, but we didn't. We crashed and burned. And it was really through desperation that I started working with Philip. I had nothing going on, and I realized, I guess I have to really get a job. So I kind of bullshitted my way into some interviews with him, and he had an opening for somebody to run his publishing company. And, he and I met, and I was older than everybody else that he was interviewing. Everyone else was lawyers. I'd never even gone to college, got kicked out of high school. And I basically said to Philip, I said, look, this is who I am. I'll work for nothing. And if you don't like it, you don't lose anything. And if it works out, it works out. And so he loved that. And we got along immediately. And I knew nothing about his music. And I told him, I said, I'm not here because I'm a Philip Glass fan, but give me a shot and I bet I can help you. And, it was just at a time in his career where a lot of the things that you can make money from hadn't really been taken advantage of. So I was able to come in and learn his business, which took me a while, and then able to do really well by him. So he and I worked together for 25 years, ended up being partners. And then I started a company on my own that did at various times, Tom Waits, Rufus Wainwright, a bunch of classical kind of composers, the Shankar family, Ravi and Anushka, and a whole bunch of other people. And I did that for a long time. And I loved the fact that I was working with people I respected and artists that I really liked. But it's a completely different mindset because it's all about them, and when you're a musician, it's all about you. And so it's a completely other side of the brain that's operating.
Okay. And then, but so you would manage them, work on the publishing side. Were you still kind of playing music on the side, just for your own, interests, own good?
I stopped for about 10 years because it hadn't been making me a living. And I really needed to focus on trying to build a life and a career. And then I hit a wall and I realized I can't not have music. And so I started playing again. And that's when I started playing again regularly and recording and then continuing since I've kind of stopped that work stuff. I retired. Essentially, my old job is still available as an unemployed musician. So I got that back again.
But you would go on and you would release quite a few solo albums, right? And then this latest one, Daylight, which just came out this week, that we're recording it the beginning of June. Talk about that album and the recording process. And I listened to it this weekend, and it has kind of that big band blues jazz feel to it. Is this the kind of music that you're really passionate about, and that you feel that I can make this music for me, and not for a record or for anyone else, but my own pleasure of being able to write and record and play music?
Well, for starters, I'm 70. Those guys on that record, Mitchell Froom, who's produced Paul McCartney, Elvis Costello, blah blah blah, and he's in Crowded House, produced them too. David Hidalgo from Los Lobos, Bob Glaub, who's played with everybody on the planet, and a German named Michael Urbano. This is the second record we've done. What's the math? 1, 2, 3, 5 of us, or whatever it is. We're all making music for us. That's for better, for worse. That's part of the joy, is that at this stage of the game, I'm not, what am I going to do? Compete with Taylor Swift or something?
No one will.
It's like,
no one will.
People say, so what do you want to do? And I want to keep doing what I'm doing, writing, recording, playing. And, it's at this point, it's so clear that you have to be doing it for yourself or else you're crazy, because there's so little, outlet justifiably for, a bunch of old baby boomers, making music. It's kind of obscene that we, so many of us still have careers. Benny Goodman's career was over when he was 30 and the Beatles showed up or something. Did anyone care about Benny Goodman anymore? No. Whereas Led Zeppelin and the Who are still the biggest bands in the world. Baby boomers rule music industry for a long time. But at any rate, the real thing I think is that you play for yourself, you write for yourself. I write with a guy named Byron Isaacs, who's in the Luminaries.
Okay.
But he played with Levon Helm for years, and was in a band called Olabelle as well. And we write to make ourselves happy. I write to make myself happy, and then I take it into a room. I play 2 or 3 times a week in a room that I have and jam and try new songs out. And with who wants to play, we get together and play. And then I play gigs, wherever, little pockets in the country and some tours in Europe periodically. And, you do what makes puts a smile on your face and the people you're playing with. And if that translates to an audience, then you're lucky.
Yeah, yeah. And have you felt that like touring these smaller venues, it's more, I always feel like music's intimate when you're able to go to a small show, it just feels more intimate, more connected. Um, is that a different, I mean, obviously it is a different vibe than playing, a larger stadium or what have you. So what is it different like now being able to tour and just be able to play the music than it is, back then, whether you were opening for a band or touring consistently on the road, and the commercial aspect of it?
Well, again, it's completely different now because I'm playing for myself and I'm not trying to, put across, build this career on getting pop hits and presenting a pop image, whatever it is. I don't mean just pop, a commercial.
Yeah.
I'm playing for myself. And there's enough of us out there that enjoy doing what I'm doing that I have a lot of, comrades that are into it and love it. I think it's kind of funny. If you look at that Dick Clark interview,
Mm-hmm.
he asked a similar question. I think, he said, do you like the big places that you're playing now or whatever? And I
Yes.
think my answer was, really, I love playing the bars. And it's funny because I was being interviewed by Bill Bentley recently, and he asked me a similar question. And he said, what's the most fun gig you ever had? The first thing that came to my mind was, playing a bar in Red Valley Grange, California, with a bunch of bikers and hippies and rednecks. And it's not, I'm not saying that because I can't play a stadium now anyway, but it really is that thing of where everybody's in on it. And it's just a big sweatbox and it's kind of crazy and there's crazy energy. And it's in this compact way that you can kind of see and feel. And to this day, if I'm in a town, and I hear music coming out of a bar, I'm like, I'm sorry, my family knows it, goes, oh God, there he goes again.
Where'd he go?
I'm going to go walk in the door because you just have no idea what might be going on in that little club. And to me, it's incredibly special because, so many times you walk in and there'll be just, 4 players playing their ass off are fantastic. And that's where it all starts in that place. And there's something really special about that. I mean, the whole stadium thing is the whole of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I can imagine.
For me, it starts in the roadhouses and the bars. And there's something incredibly charming about that stuff.
Have you ever been like walked in on a bar or something where they are playing, that song, and be like,
yeah,
that's my song.
Yeah. No, that's happened so many times. Especially I'll hear it and then I'll kind of walk over and I mean, I never say anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so sweet, And again, it's part of what makes it sweet for me is that it's a really cool song. And it would be different if it was something that was a hit that, was fabricated by a producer we were working with or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no synth drum on it. A lot of, we got lucky because that record was made right before or as everybody was going boosh, boosh on the snare drum. That's still just an old snare drum in a studio with a mic on it with no boosh, and it all got, 80s out of it, the music
Yeah.
during that period. And we managed to not produce it. It was like not produced. So it still sounds like, the end of the 70s and just really early 80s before, in my mind, a lot of that overproduced sound that started happening.
Yeah, and it's a classic. I mean, I just heard it on the radio last week on a classic radio station. I happened to put it on. I hear it. And I was like, oh, I'll be talking to Jim next week. So it'll live on. And then I wanted to ask you too about the music industry. And I know you've kind of referenced this a few times. Do you think it's easier or harder today to be discovered? Obviously with social media, I think you can put your own content out there. But on the flip side, there's so much saturation that what rises to the top. And then I do feel like, it's kind of like a one and done, especially with TikTok. Something can go viral. It's a hit song. This artist becomes big and then it's boom, move on to the next one. So do you think it's harder or easier nowadays with the technology honestly, that we have?
Yeah, honestly, I don't really pay attention. I don't have TikTok. If you could ask my daughter and she could tell you. I think she had over 2 million hits on that Jenny thing. It's like insane. I can't watch because I don't want to go there. But um, it's so different. When I was coming up, it's almost like the dark ages, like the caveman. You basically, you would build an audience through gigs locally. And if you were good, you could build an audience. And then if you built an audience, you could maybe get the interest of somebody who had a connection to a label that could maybe get a little demo to, money to make a demo. And then you could make a demo. Now everybody starts right off making a record. So there's no carburetor, there's no filtering system. So there's just so much available. And of course, in that, there's probably a ton of really great stuff, but then there's a ton of mediocrity. And so it's just more, and more isn't better. I mean, it's better in the way that there's access for everybody. And I get that, the whole internet thing. But, it's like I was just telling the woman that works for me, who was putting something out for me because she does all my social media, and she was putting out a bonus video. And I said, let's not use the word bonus, because as soon as someone says like bonus tracks, I'm like, I was happy with 12. I don't need the other 5 that you're going to throw at me.
Yeah.
And it's just because there's just so much content. And I don't even know how to listen to music, because, you make this music and people listen to like 3 seconds on Instagram of your music. I'm not even sure where it's getting listened to. It's just so dramatically different. I don't know where to begin.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like, albums aren't listened to now, because you used to go to like, the record would drop, you go to the record store, you're excited to get it at midnight, you get it and you play it all the way through and you listen to all the songs. Now I feel like the album's put out and people will jump around between the songs, but it's not like being able, I guess you lose that impact of like having something physical in your hands that you purchased, that you want to listen to because you went out to get it. It's not just having to tap a button on your phone and it plays.
You have an investment.
Yeah, exactly.
With that thing that you're buying. And I mean, this is all sounds just like, as my daughter calls me, it's all the dad rock stuff.
Dad rock.
I mean, I listened to Dark Side of the Moon in the car this weekend from top to bottom. And it was like, oh my God, this record is so great. I didn't know it when it came out, but obviously later, and that's a whole, tracks are all 6 minute long, 7, 12, 10 minutes long. And, that wouldn't happen today, that experience of listening to a whole album, which, I grew up on, which was so much fun. It's just, it is what it is now. And it's like, it's my daughter's world.
Yeah.
And that's her world that she'll be, waxing nostalgic about 40 years from now.
Yeah. And who knows, and who knows 40 years from now, how people will be listening to music, if it'll be different. And I feel like, also the industry has changed. I mean, it seems like all the revenue now is in touring. And so bands are extensively touring, and then that spikes, ticket prices. And then now, ticket prices are through the roof. So because I always feel like, people who I've talked to some people who are like fans of bands, but they're like, I can't pay $500, to sit in the quote unquote cheap seats of the concert, but I really am passionate about this band. And I think maybe it's the whole entertainment industry and sports and everything. But yeah, I mean, it just seems like the whole revenue of the music industry has changed over the years. I don't know if it's for the better or the worse, but
I don't either. Well, don't ask me, but it used to be that you put a record out and you would subsidize touring in order to sell CDs, and now it's the other way around. Now you give the music away to get people to come to the concert. It's totally flipped itself.
And I read about the revenue side of something like Spotify, where I think 3 seconds of the song plays in order to get paid on it. And so artists will write like the hook, like right away to trap that person in to at least get the 3 seconds or 30 seconds of it, and that music in songwriting's different now for that, geared like towards the revenue side of streaming. Yeah. It's interesting how it's changed like that. So one last question: what advice would you give to a young artist that would, want to follow in your footsteps and make a career of music, especially now, everything that you've done throughout your career? What advice would you give to them?
Well, first thing that comes to my mind is play for yourself. Write, play, make music that makes you happy, because everything else that happens uh, after that is gravy. But if you make music that you love and it doesn't make you $1 million, you still get the sustenance from experiencing that and going through that whole process. If you make something you don't like and it's a hit, then there's, how do you follow that? Make music you don't like or you're not really attached to? But I mean, it's really, I think, play for yourself, write for yourself.
Yeah.
It's got to start with that, because that's really, what you end up with is the joy from the process.
Okay, well, Jim, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And the new album is Daylight, so I'll put the link to the album in the show notes of
Okay.
YouTube and across Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else. Yeah, so
Great.
thank you so much for doing this, and I really like the album. Like I said, I listened to it over the weekend, and I thought it was great. So
Thanks, man.
yeah, well, keep doing what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing the rest of your career and everything that you do. Your retirement career. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Cheers.